Well, I went to school in Stuttgart, Germany, and then went on to business college for 2 years, and that was already during the war. And after business college, I was drafted into the German labor service, which is the Reichsarbeitsdienst. And I was supposed to serve there 5 to 6 months. The war was getting worse, so all the young people and men was drafted. So the people in the country that had farms and things like that, they didn't have the manpower to take care of it. So we were not released and had to serve, they said, another 7 months in that capacity to go out in the farms and help them. And we were serving, we were all living in a camp, and we was sent every morning out from the camp on bicycle for about 3 or 4 miles to the different farmers, and we stayed there all day and took care of things there, which was difficult for me because I did not know anything about farming. But we was rotated every 4 weeks to a different family. Most of the men, you know, was gone. It was most of the wife and the children. And I had some good experience there, but I also had some bad experiences there. It wasn't easy, you know, because when you live in the city all your life, you're just not used to that kind of life. I had to go, the good ones was, people was very nice, the women was very nice, and there was few places they had men too, the husbands was there, maybe they was disabled and all. And we were dispatched for 4 weeks to each family and then transferred, rotated to someone else. After that time, we, let's see, after that time we went to somebody, had to be dispatched to someone else. Well, I had 2 real good families there. The husband was gone, and I just worked with the wives and the children and all like that, and had to take care of everything, worked some on the farm. Then the next time I was transferred to he was a bachelor, he was disabled, he had only 1 arm, but he had an apple orchard. And so I was always good about climbing trees, and you know, we had cherry trees at home. And so he was glad that I could help him, and he had a little niece living with him that was 13 to kind of see after him, because he didn't have anybody else. I don't know, you know, where the family was or anything. So the little girl and I, well, I wasn't much older, I was 19. So we just went out on the apple farm, you know, and then he came with us, and we had to pick up the apples from the ground that fell and sort them in one area. And then we had to get up on, or I went up on the ladder and picked the apples from the tree, which was a lot of fun, you know. And then we separated them for the market, you know. And that went real well. And so after 4 weeks, he said, well, now, he says, I can't let you go. I said, well, you probably have to. He said, no, because you know what you're doing. So I said, well, you can try, you know. And sure enough, he called the person that was in charge. I can't remember what it was, what the title was. But anyway, she okayed that I could stay with him 4 more weeks till the harvest was over. And I really enjoyed it. The only thing I didn't like about it, he wanted me to cook him a chicken for dinner. I never even plucked the chicken or nothing, you know, like that. But he rammed the chicken's neck, and so he showed me what I needed to do, so I did. So I knew enough about cooking for my mother because I kept watching her, you know. And it turned out pretty good. So that was my time with him for two terms. And the next time I was dispatched to the kitchen. There was about 40 girls there. And so many had to be there in the kitchen to cook for everybody, because everybody during the daytime, they were eating at the farms where they was dispatched to, and then at night we all came back to the camp. And whoever was there had to cook supper, and they also had a laundry there. Some was dispatched to laundry, you know. So that was fine. So the time come that we were supposed to be discharged. Well, I had another issue there with somebody, and he wasn't very nice. But anyway, I dealt with it. But then at the end, he was real good because he knew what I was doing, that I was doing it right, you know. And so I got the furlough for 3 days to see my sister. She had gallbladder surgery then, and that was must have been in 40, let's see, it was in 43 I went to start with, so it must have been in 44. And you know, gallbladder surgery at that time was very dangerous, and so I got a pass for 3 days. So he and his wife met me, which I didn't know, at the railroad station for me to catch the train, and bought me eggs and lard and bread to take to my family, and that was really nice. So it was by the time for us to get discharged, and they wouldn't let us be discharged because the war had gotten so bad. So what's next? Well, you go to the service now. You know, I was going to be dispatched to the, well, first we was dispatched to a training camp, when we were taught everything about the Army. We was trained on rifles and everything, you know, that you really needed to know. And of course it was tough. You had to get up real early in the morning, and which we always got up early in the morning at the camps too, because we had sometimes 5 and 10 miles to go on the bicycle. But anyway, that lasted about 6 weeks, and that was near the Dutch border. I had forgotten the name of the town it was in, and that was kind of rough, you know. You had the military infantry training like, and then they checked out what education we had and everything. So after they found out that I was in business college, they transferred me to the radar unit, and I was sent to Dresden, Germany, and it was beyond Dresden. It was Bischofswerda, Germany, and I was trained on the radar because they had planned to send us, our unit, to the anti-aircraft unit in Vienna. We was transferred after our training from there to Vienna. And there we was stationed on top of a bunker, if you know where that is. I was radar, I was on the radar, and I relayed the information to the anti-aircraft unit as the planes, you know, was coming in, and we had to stay there a while for about 2 months or so, and then we were transferred to Wiener Neustadt, which is south of Vienna, and we was dispatched there into a regular unit. There was some anti-aircraft people there, and then we was on the radar, you know. There were 7 of us. And that was just before the Russians broke through on the south of Wiener Neustadt. So after knowing what was happening, they was taking a lot of the women that was in service, and they was taking them to, where was that in Russia? Anyway, they had to work in coal mines and things like that. And we had a lieutenant, he said, I'm not going to let you all stay, you all have to go. So he's gotten a farmer that had a big wagon, or whatever you call it, in a tractor, and he got us all on there with all our equipment. We had to take some of our radar equipment and put it back, and he let us go as far as Vienna with that and unload everything, because there was some secret information there, you know. And after that, well, the Russians was already coming through. You could hear them, you know, you could hear the artillery and everything. So he said, you're not going to stay there. I'm going to take the responsibility of you staying there. And I was in charge of the girls. We were 7. He said, you'll go ahead and go further into Germany. And so they had a tank unit coming along. And he said, well, you'll get up on those tanks, and go as far as you can go, and we did. And of course that was tough, you know, being out in the open and really not comfortable at all. We hadn't had no way to change clothes or nothing. All we had is what we had on, a little bit we could take along. So when we got there, he put us out at the railroad station. And from there, I had to go to the officer that was in charge. But I didn't have any papers. I didn't have anything, you know, that where we should go or anything. So when we got there, the lieutenant that was there, he said, where are you coming from? No, he said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Stuttgart. He said, well, I'm from Stuttgart too. I said, well, that's good. So he said, well, where you all want to go? I said, we want to go home if we can do nothing else, you know. He said, well, I'll send you as far as I can send you towards your home, and he did. And of course it was an ordeal to get there because he told us where to catch some transportation and told us where to go and what highway. So we walked to the highway with whatever we had on our backs. And there were so many civilians there, they would not let us on those, you know, people come with those flatbed trucks and different things like that, and they would not let us go on. So all of a sudden I seen that lieutenant coming up. He had the Iron Cross, you know, the Ritterkreuz they called it. And he came up and he asked me, he said, where are you girls going? I said, we're trying to get home or go somewhere. We have nowhere to go. I have no papers, no nothing, you know. He said, oh, you just wait a minute. Right now you're going in the next vehicle that comes. And they sure that he would not let one person on that flatbed, like it had a little thing around it, you know. So we went on and went as far as we could go. And that was really a help. And then we got somewhere where we could stay and spend the night. It was a camp too, where we could take a bath and, you know, freshen up. So that was really an ordeal. It took me about 10 days to get home from where we was at, from Vienna, you know. And let's see, after that, he told me where there was another place where they would have to stop and take people along where they wanted to go because, you know, people didn't have no transportation or anything. So he did put us out, told us where to go, and we went there. And so the guy that come along with his big old truck or whatever it was open too. He said, well, where you all want to go? I said, I want to go to Stuttgart or Bad Cannstatt, which is a suburb of Stuttgart. He said, well, I'm going that way. I said, well, good. And then 4 of the other girls was going that way, except they had to get back off and detour to different directions, you know. But he put me out maybe 2 blocks from home. So I was real excited. And of course my parents didn't know the alarm was just going off. They had an air raid, but the planes went to Nuremberg, and they was putting the bombs in Nuremberg, not Stuttgart. And so when I got home, my mother was still in the air raid shelter. She hadn't gotten home, and my dad was at home. And of course she was excited because they hadn't heard from me in about 4 weeks because they didn't know where I was, you know. So of course that was good, and then I stayed home there for a while. And by then I think it was hard to say. It was very close to the end of the war then, because I think we got home in April, and I believe the war ended in May, wasn't it? Yeah, we got home around Easter. So of course I stayed home, and everybody else did. Of course I had no papers or nothing, and you know, I said, well, I'll just wait till later on to see what I'm supposed to do. So I stayed with my parents, of course, about every day or every night we went to the shelter for the air raids, you know, but it was lucky. Nothing happened. We always got through fine. Then after that, well, then the war, you know, ended May the 8th or May the 8th, I believe. And of course, then the troops was coming in. And the troops that came in to Stuttgart first was the French troops and the Moroccan troops. And that was kind of bad, you know. You had to be real careful because there was a lot of rape going on, all that kind of stuff, and just terrible. And then they called out, and we had to go ahead and bring a mattress and bring this and bring that to deliver to them, you know, even if we didn't have enough, you know. We had to go ahead and deliver what they wanted, light bulbs and everything else. But all that went well. We didn't have any bad incidents at my home. And after they left, the French troops and the Moroccan troops moved back, and the American troops came from the east, and they took over then, and they got our side of town. And they stayed there until 1940, must have been 1947. Let's see, 45. Well, anyway, the war ended, and then the American troops occupied our town and the surrounding areas. And we had no trouble at all. That was real nice. So that was I think that was in May, I'm pretty sure. And in July, I met my husband, which was an American soldier, or sergeant. He had to search our home and everything to see if they could find any anti-American things and all that kind of stuff. And he did. He didn't, of course, find nothing. So he just was interested in the pictures they had up there, because I had my brother was in service, my cousin was in service, and so forth, and boyfriend was in service. Of course, he got killed. But anyway, that didn't interest him then, you know. They said, well, if you don't have anything else, that's fine, you know. But he just started talking to me for a while, and then he left. And, you know, you could not be seen with any. It was against the law. What is fraternization? What do you call that? Yeah. And you couldn't go anywhere, anything. And, of course, he left, and I figured I'd never see him again, you know. So one day, Mother and I had, during the air raid, we put everything in the cellar, in the basement, you know, like with china and crystal and all these things. So we had the windows open, was the big double window, and my sister was taking the china, and I was handing it to my mother, and all of a sudden I seen these 3 American soldiers coming up. That was in July the 19th. And I said, well, that looks like the man that was at our house yesterday. And sure enough, he hit his buddy's shoulder and said, I'll see y'all, or something. I didn't hear what he said. But anyway, he came down, and of course I couldn't go out or anything, and he couldn't, you know. He just talked to me outside, you know, for a while. And so, well, he didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do either, you know. I would have liked to see him again, and I reckon he would have liked to see me, you know. So he come back the next day. Well, sure enough, my daddy let him in. So, but anyway, we started seeing each other, but we couldn't go anywhere. We had to be staying right at home, you know. It was against the law to do that. And that was in 1945. And he had to leave Germany December the 15th, 1945. All combat troops had to leave Germany. Well, he went to France, and he tried to re-enlist in France, but they wouldn't let him. So he had to come home. So he came on home, and of course, you know, you couldn't communicate with letters and everything, but where we lived, behind us was an American motor pool. And I had met the sergeant there just by passing. I had to go by there to go to the streetcar to go to my job. And he got to talking to me. He was very nice. He was an older man. So I told him, I said, well, you know, I have a friend, and he just left for America, but we like to correspond with each other, you know. He said, well, that's no problem. He said, you give me your letters, and I get his. And that's what we did. And that worked out just fine. He was very nice about it. And so the last letter I had gotten from my husband was in 1946, in March. He says, I re-enlisted. I said, you did? He said, yeah. I said, I had to re-enlist for 3 years, because if I wouldn't have, they would have sent me to Japan. And I didn't want to go to Japan. So anyway, he re-enlisted for 3 years. I said, good. I said, when you going to come back? He said, well, I hope be there in a few weeks. I said, well, good. So I waited, and you know how that is. But he never did show up. I said, well, so I went to the guy that was getting my letters, but he never did write. He told me I'm leaving such a date, Germany, you know. I figured, well, it shouldn't take him that long to come back. Well, it was April, it was May, it was June, and still no wait. Well, I said, well, he's just like everybody else, I guess, just don't show up anymore, you know. So the sergeant that took our mail back and forth, he said, well, I'm going to call over there. Well, it was hard to get, you know, somebody in the telephone because his family lived in the country and they didn't even have telephones. They had to go to an operator there or something. But he couldn't even get through. He lived in Henry, if you know that's a name to you here, out of Hemingway. But anyway, I said, well, that's just the way it is. I don't know. And of course I was miserable. And on July the 19th, well, first I have to tell you, the sergeant that I corresponded with with him, he said, well, I'm going to find him. I'm going to find out if somebody had come. He said there was just a ship coming in with you know, men from overseas. Well, he did, but he said, I don't know. He said they thought they might see somebody that was like him, you know, looked like him, but that wasn't a good information, I don't think. But anyway, I said, well, I'll just wait and see what happens. And sure enough, after about a week or 10 days, the doorbell rang at my house, and it was 3 rings, and he always rang 3 times. But I had a little niece, and she was a little girl, 4 years old or so, and every time she came, she rang 3 times too because she knew about it, you know. I said, oh my goodness, that's Brigadier again. And my daddy went to the door. He said, it's the Wade, it's the Wade. His name was Wade, you know. Oh my Lord, I stood up and I couldn't move. And sure enough, it was him, and he had re-enlisted, but it took him that long to go through all the things. But then he was lucky enough to be stationed right in my hometown. Wasn't that luck? So anyway, he stayed there for a good while, and then he was transferred to Regensburg, which was about, I guess, probably 150 miles or so from Stuttgart, where I lived. But then on the weekends, he come by train, which had a very short time to stay. And he stayed there a while, and then he was transferred to Berchtesgaden, Germany. You probably heard of Berchtesgaden, Germany. And he was there a long time. And so at that time, they lifted that you could, you know, marry somebody, that you could go to Germany if you are approved and everything. And of course, I had to go to Berchtesgaden and see everybody in the world, the doctors and the captain and the chaplain. It was just a big ordeal, you know, but I had real good reports. And you just have to wait till all the papers are cleared, and then you can get an exit permit, you know. And he had to leave by December the 4th, I think it was, Germany. Germany, had to leave Germany by then, you know. And of course, we got married October the 3rd, actually, October the 3rd, we had 2 weddings. It was just an official. We had to go to the Bürgermeister, which is the mayor in Berchtesgaden, and the army chaplain. But that was just a small thing. And the couple that I stayed with, the German lady and her husband, they fixed dinner for us and that kind of thing. It was real small. And then I had a church wedding in Germany, in Stuttgart, you know, after that. And that was on the 30th of October, 1948. He was stationed back in Berchtesgaden. Of course, I went with him, and then we were stationed we was put up at the hotel post there. The army put us up, didn't cost us anything. That was real nice, wasn't it? And then we had to be out, I think it was by the 4th of December. And so we had to fly, you know, back to the States then. And then he was discharged in January. He had to go to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Yeah, Fort Dix, New Jersey, and was discharged. And then he came, you know, back. And we stayed on the farm with my brother-in-law, and he worked there for about a year. And then we moved to Andrews in 1951. No, we stayed there 2 years. We moved to Andrews in 1951. Well, we stayed with his parents. there, and there was a little house across the street, and we moved into that and had bought some stuff we needed, you know, furniture. I had bought a lot of stuff from Germany just for the house, you know, what you needed, but I mean, we couldn't bring any furniture at that time. Of course, the Army shipped all of the stuff, you know, free to us. And then my husband worked with his brother-in-law on the farm. He had a big farm in Henry. Of course, he's been there a long time now. And then in 1951, we moved to Andrews. And my husband worked for Life of Georgia for, I believe, 13 years. He finally was staff manager then. And I went to work for Oneida Knitting Mill. Was it Oneida Knitting? Yeah. Oneida Knitting Mills had just started in Andrews, but they wasn't very branched out, you know. And I had a degree in accounting. And he said, "No, we can't hire you now because we don't have an office yet." He said, "But I'll never forget it." He said, "But I will hire you as soon as we have an office." I said, "Okay." I said, I didn't go to school, you know, in college to go ahead a degree and then sew on a sewing machine. And okay, the time came and I had the highest rate as far as fastness, setting in sleeves and T-shirts. So he wouldn't take me off. I marched to the office that same day. I said, "Mr. Owen, I'm sorry, but I have to give you notice. I'm leaving as of today." I said, "I did not go to school on the sewing machine, to sew on the sewing machine the rest of my life." I said, "I want to go back in my field, you know." Of course, he understood. But I mean, it wasn't fair for him to tell me he would hire me, you know. I would have never stayed to start with. And then I went to work after that for Mr. Green, Royce Green Sr., and you probably heard of him. He used to have this sort of Plymouth dealership, and I worked for him a good many years. And then, well, in the meantime, I had my first son, and I stayed out a while, you know. And then later I had the man from the general, what was it? What was the telephone company's name? I can't remember. GTE, yeah. I went when the manager come to see me. Somebody had told him about me. That was Mr. Willie Smith that had the oil company here. And he sent him to see me because they needed somebody in Andrews that had fixed an office down there, you know. And so he came to see me, and I said, "Well, that's fine." You know, I gave him all the information that I had, and another lady had applied. And it was but a few days, and he called me, and he said, "You'll have the job." He said, "I'll give you 50 cents more than you was making an hour." I was making an hour, $1 an hour, and he was giving me $1.50 an hour. I said, "Well, I'm glad to take that," because I had to take a babysitter to keep my little boy, you know. And from there I went to, I stayed there. I stayed here in Andrews. I had the office by myself, doing all the collecting and everything and writing orders. And then I was here 13 years in Andrews. And then they closed that office because they combined everything. And I was working in Georgetown for 10.5 years with GTE. I had almost like 3 months of having 25 years. But I had to quit on account of my husband's illness. He had a stroke, and then he had Alzheimer's disease, and he was just getting worse and worse. And I just, you know, I had to stay home. And I had part-time help from the, what do you call this place in Georgetown? They send you 2 nurses, you know. Twice, home care twice a day. They sent me home care twice a day because I was, you know, I was just by myself. And that was good, but he passed away. It'll be 9 years this October. In 2000, he passed away. I studied 6 years. I spoke pretty good, but not like now, which still I make mistakes, but, you know, I could speak with him, and he could speak a pretty good bit German because he was in Germany so long, see? So that worked out pretty good. we knew it was coming. I mean, I knew it was a war coming, but you know, at that age, in 39, I wasn't but 13 years old. And yeah, 26, I was born in 26, I was 13 years old, so it was kind of, you know, you just didn't know what to think about it. Of course, we did pretty good, you know. We weren't bombed out or anything. And I was lucky now my sister and her family, they were bombed out, but she and the children had gone to the country, not to be in the city. You see Stuttgart and in Esslingen, that's a big area. So they were fine. I have only one brother and two sisters. Yeah, that's right. Half the thing, they all gone, they all get dead. Because my father married a second time, and they all was 4, 5, and 6, I think, when he married my mother, you know. And so by the time I was where I could really get around and talk and all, they was just about teenagers. Oh yeah, very well, very well. He had a very nice family. Everyone was just as good to me as they could be, you know. And even the neighbors and everything. They was glad to have me here. And I really never had any trouble with anybody. That makes you feel good, you know, when you come and you don't know anybody. I did not go back to Germany till 1955. My mother was dying with cancer. And I went back on the Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary, come back, either one, I don't know which, but Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary. At that time, you know, air traffic wasn't that popular then. And I stayed for 2 months. Because when they discovered she had cancer, they said, well, the most they could give her is 18 months, and she died. She died about 9 or so months afterwards, you know, so. And I didn't go back for the funeral because I said it, you know. And then too, I had 2 children by then too, so. And that was kind of hard, but that's life. I didn't go back for 20 years. I went back in 74 because I had 3 children by then. They went to school, they went to college, you know. And that was kind of hard. And so I went in 74, and I stayed with my dad, of course, you know. And my mother died in 55. And my sister, both of my sisters were still there. And my brother, he was a Russian prisoner. He was in World War II. He was a Russian prisoner. Even 5 years after the war. Yeah, and he was very sick when he came home, and he died real early. He was 60 when he died. Because the only correspondence we had one time was from him is a postcard that we knew he was still living, and he could only write 20 words, you know. And at that time, I had already met my husband, and so we wrote him a card back and hoping that he would be able to come home soon, you know, but I didn't tell him why. And he said he could only write once a month 20 words on a card, you know. So I mean, what are you going to say in 20 words, you know? And when I went in 74, he was home. He had come home in the meantime, but he was very, very sick. But he got better, and then he finally died when he was 60. I think he was 60 years old when he died. You know, when you're in Russian prison, that was before he went during the war in prison, and then 5 years after, you know, that was hard. And then my sister's husband, he died in a Russian prison. And she had 2 little children then. That was really tough. Well, I was in the Hitler Youth, we all were, you know. And
tell us about that.
We never did do anything bad or anything. We wore uniforms, and then we we were singing, marching and singing, and we was knitting socks for old people, you know, that couldn't afford to buy them and things like that. And we went to concerts together, the group, you know, even with the, well, you didn't call them cops, you didn't call them, I don't know what you call them, with the Hitler Youth, with the male. Sometimes both male and female went together, you know, and went to concerts, and that's all we did. We never did do anything bad, and we wasn't taught anything bad. You know, there's a lot of that stuff what people put out about it is not true. And a lot is true too, you know. But there's things that we did not know anything about it. As far as concentration came, never heard about it. Never heard about it. And I mean, that's the truth. Nobody, I don't think, in Germany heard about it unless it was directly, you know, escorts and all that kind of stuff. So just didn't know anything about it. Of course, the time during the war with the bombing and everything, that was hard. You know, of course, I wasn't home most of the time, so. But we still had some bombing after I got back, you know, before the war. I got back about a month before the war. And me and my mother were running for dear life from the house to the bunker. We had underground bunker built into the mountain. Held about, I forgot how many people, I think probably 1,500 or more people. Yeah, we was maybe 5 or 6 blocks from it, but we ran hard as we could. And we made it every time we went. Except one time I lost my mother. I was running ahead of her, and I lost her, and I didn't know where she was at, and I couldn't find her anymore. And there was this big swimming pool with the, you know, with the housing and everything in front, before it. And so I think she got so scared until she ran into it, and then I was in the bunker, and they wouldn't let me back out to look for her. But then whenever it was cleared, you know, she was coming out, and I was coming out. I was a little bit further down than she was, and everything was fine. We went back home. That's the way we lived there till the war ended. I lived in what you call Bad Cannstatt, which is a suburb of Stuttgart. We lived across the river, and we didn't have as much bombing as Stuttgart itself had, because Stuttgart, I reckon they had about 500,000 people altogether, you know. The city was huge, and it was damaged bad. But we had plenty of it too. But so far, so good. It was, you know, we always somehow got through it. And there was, as far as I know, there wasn't anybody in the family, in the close area, in our area, that was bombed, you know, because see, the schools, the big schools always had the Red Cross sign on top. So, and also the hospitals. So I reckon they tried to get around that if they could, you know. Food was hard to get. It was hard to get in like my grandfather lived with my mother and myself, and at that time during the war, and there wasn't hardly enough food to go around. You know, it was ration so strong. I think the family got 1 egg a week. What can you do with 1 egg a week? You know, and you got maybe a little tiny piece of meat and maybe a loaf of bread or something like that. And of course, my dad always had a little garden, just a little tiny garden, you know, where we had a few things we could raise. But that part was really hard. And then my grandfather, he was real spoiled. He was used to his cigars and his wine, and he couldn't get all of that, so he was just irritable to live with. Oh, goodness. But it was the time, you know. And I don't know, I guess it's in a woman that you always give your husband or your father or grandfather, you always let them have the best of the food, with like meat and stuff like that, and the women do without, you know. Oh, but we all made it. Some of our friends, they had like raspberries and strawberries and, you know, in garden, different things, and so we went. A friend of mine, I was real close, and her parents and my parents were real close. We went on the streetcar so far, and then we walked with the little baskets in our hand and the little old rucksack on the back, and we walked about 10 miles to get there, but there's no other transportation, you know. When we come back, we walked back with it full, with strawberries, so, you know, vegetables and things like that. Whatever they had, they shared with us. Then we caught a streetcar back home. When we was young then, about 19, I think, 20, something like that. We always in the air raid shelter, you know, in the built into the mountain. And then they said, well, we knew that first they said the French troop was coming in there, but then it was Moroccans that was coming. That was a tank division that was coming into Stuttgart. And then there was French troops, I think, coming too before the American troops would come. But we were, of course, relieved, but we had to wait a while till they could us released, you know. And when we were released, Mother and I, we were walking on home. We was probably about 5 blocks or so from the shelter. And they always, and the big tanks, you know, it was black. It was a black unit. I don't know. There must have been Tunisians, something like that, you know. They were always black. There wasn't American troops. Later on came the American troops after the French, because, see, French troops occupied Stuttgart in the Tunisian before anybody else, and we were scared of them, really, because they was robbing and raping and everything else, you know, those Tunisian troops and all. So, but, you know, you just stayed out of the way, because anybody ever come to the door, my daddy he was always hiding me in a closet or somewhere. You know, what you had to do, you do what you had to do. Because at that time they come back and when they rang your doorbell, you know what you're going to do. One guy came to the door. He was from Tunisia too, and my daddy had one of those little gold chains with the watch, you know, they had the watches a long time ago. His daddy gave him, and he seen that watch on him when he answered the door. And he come back the next day, and he had something in his hand. And I didn't know what he wanted. I didn't understand what he was saying. And he pointed his hands on my dad's pocket there, you know, he seen the chain. That's what he wanted. Well, he was afraid not to give it to him. So he handed him a little sack of tobacco in a little pouch. You know how they have them little pouches. And he got rid of his gold watch. But, you know, you couldn't do anything else. You was afraid to. Well, we never did know what was coming next, because then the loudspeakers come on and they said, please bring a mattress, you know, for a bed, a pillow, and some blankets, and have it at the town hall at such and such a time. Well, what you going to do? You have to take it. That was when the French troops was there, and the other, you know, Tunisian, I guess they were Tunisians. And you had to do it, and bring light bulbs, and I mean, you know. So that was just it. You just didn't know what they was going to do, ask for next. Finally, the troops left, and the Americans pulled back from, they agreed that the French get that side, and the Americans get that side. Of course, we was glad, you know. We was really glad, and we didn't have really much incidents of anything, you know, when after they occupied it, everything was real good, really. And we didn't have to take stuff to them and all. They just took care of their own, you know. That was good. And you didn't have to be afraid either. You know, like going down the street or walking late in the evening or anything. It was just, you know, really good. And of course they stayed there till, gosh, I don't know. Well, I guess they were still there when I left. Yeah, they all were still there when I left, see. In fact, I guess they still have some over there now. I don't know. I really don't know what the point is, but maybe for security, you know. Because that's a long time. Long time.